Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining University Express today, which is Erie County Senior Services free lifelong learning program for older adults. Thank you for being here with us virtually for this very special class. We have about 100 people registered online with us today, which is a record for our program, so we're very excited. I want to quickly mention to you all that University Express is now available at 26 different senior centers and libraries throughout Erie County. No membership is required at any location, and our classes are open to everyone. You can also join us virtually like you have today, and we're live streaming now from 3 different locations. Now on to today's class. You have all joined us muted without your videos showing. It's not because you've done anything wrong. These are just the settings we use for our program. We will be using our chat feature to communicate with our guest instructor. So please feel free to type in any questions or comments you have in the moment. I will be monitoring those for Michael, and we will try to review as many as we can at the end of the class. For those who are new to this WebEx program, the chat button should be in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and you can type in questions where the whole audience can see or individual questions that only I can view. So feel free to play around with that a little bit. So now on to introducing our special guest speaker. If you guys are anything like me, you love crime mysteries. I actually find the whole history of the Mafia a fascinating topic. I loved the Godfather movies growing up, and I think I watched all of them at least 10 times. And when I learned about the Strong Buffalo connection, it intrigued me more. As fate would have it, a woman at the Amherst Senior Center handed me a book last semester called Gangsters and Organized Crime in Buffalo, and she wanted to learn more. So we went to work here at Erie County Senior Services to find the author, who graciously agreed to bring his book to life for us as one of our classes. To share a little bit of background on our author, Michael Rizzo, he was born and raised in the suburbs of Buffalo. History was not his first love, but after purchasing an 1893 house in Buffalo, a light bulb went off. The rest, they say, is history. Michael released his very first book in 2005 and has not stopped writing ever since. I know he has another book soon to be released that he's going to share with us about, so I'll let him do that. But for now, I'd like to welcome Michael to University Express and sincerely thank him for taking time out of his schedule to be here with us today. Now I'll turn things over to you, Michael.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I am honored to have so many people wanting to hear the stories that I'm going to tell from my book here, Gangsters and Organized Crime in Buffalo. I was born in Buffalo, raised in the suburbs, lived in the city for that 1893 house was in Buffalo on the west side. And I didn't history, I did well in school, but history was not, my favorite subject until I bought that house and I started doing research on the background of the people that lived there, and that kind of started things rolling. In 2005, I released my first book, which was Through the Mayor's Eyes. It was a history of all the mayors of Buffalo. Thought I was going to become rich, and I found out that's not how it worked. It sold. I've sold several hundred, 500 copies maybe of that book over the years. A lot of times to schools and stuff. But so what happens is I had met this woman when I was younger. She claimed that she was related to Stefano Magadino, who was the godfather of the Mafia here in Buffalo. And I forgot about it for a long time. And then one day I decided just to look it up. And I started doing research, and I found no connection to her and that family. But my dad had also mentioned that his cousin was in the Buffalo mob. And it was just all of these things that had me thinking about it. And I decided, let's do some research. So I started requesting files from the FBI, started researching newspaper articles, started looking up different things. And slowly, over the course of time, I bought 300 or probably more than 300 books on the Mafia, Most of them were of no help to me. I still have a good chunk of them that had Buffalo related things. And the interesting thing is that Buffalo is it was important in the history of the mafia, but it is not represented that way in the movies, in books, and a lot of different things. So I wrote this book. It is still came out in 2012. It's still my best-selling book. I don't even remember how many copies have been sold, but I'm guessing there's a handful of you at least out there that have read it, which is maybe one of the reasons why you wanted to hear about this. When I was in Buffalo, I live out in the Seattle area now. Up until 2013, I was doing tours on the west side and in Allentown. We were doing walking tours. Originally, I had a bus tour in Niagara Falls. We went to all throughout Niagara Falls up to Lewiston. We drove past Magaddino's homes, told a great story, but it wasn't profitable. In fact, it cost me a lot of money to do it. So then I started doing the walking tours in Buffalo. And if you're interested, Explore Buffalo still does those tours that I originally created. One on the west side, one in Allentown, which really good tours. Allentown has so many spots. The whole Elmwood, Allentown area. We're going to talk about a few of those things. And after writing the book, people coming out of the woodwork, people telling me that they had stories. People would go on the tours. They'd say, "Hey, after I tell a story, they'd like, that was my uncle," things like that. Or people would tell me that they knew somebody, or they asked me questions. Do I know this person? Do you know what happened to this person? All kinds of different things like that. So that's the reason why I got into it, why I wrote it. And if you haven't, if you like the Buffalo crime stuff, this book here, Double Rush, is a fiction book I wrote. And basically what it was I was a bike messenger in Buffalo for 7 years. And I had all these stories about being a bike messenger. And those stories alone are kind of boring. So what I did was I took the bike messenger stories and I mixed them in with a lot of Buffalo Mafia stories, and I changed dates and times, but a lot of the stories are very similar to things that happened and took place. So if you're looking for a fiction book, maybe you want to check that out. That's something that might interest you. Let me get over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a little overview of the Buffalo Mafia. We're going to talk about the Buffalo family, a brief history of Stefano Magadino, about unions, about a Rembrandt painting, a beauty salon, and many more things. Now, you're welcome to ask questions. I don't know if we'll get to them all during this, or if there are things I can answer. If there are things I can't answer, I would be more than happy to do that. So what we've got is, first off, what is the Buffalo Mafia? Well, to some, the Mafia itself is a myth that never happened. And I've heard that from many people who just called me a liar and said that I made these stories up. Since the book came out, I've had all kinds of people tell me they was fake and things like that. But I've read enough, I've talked to enough people, and I know that it is a real thing, and there's no two ways around it. The Mafia in Buffalo started in the early 1900s with some Italian immigrants. Early leaders included Angelo Puma, Angelo Palmieri, and Stefano Magadino. Buffalo's Little Italy was in the Canal District on the waterfront where the Erie Canal terminated. If you've seen or if you've gone down to where the arena is and where they recreated the whole Erie Canal down there, that is where Dante Place and where they were run down tenements, and that's where a lot of that took place. And what you can see is these photos here gives you a little idea. These are photos of the Canal District around 1903, 1904. It was a rundown tenement area, but it was home to hundreds of Italian families. They were all living in this area. And the unfortunate thing is a lot of them would prey on their own people, and that's kind of how the Mafia worked. So let's go through a basic Mafia family hierarchy. So what we've got here is you've got the boss. The boss is the CEO. He's the head of the company. Think Al Capone, John Gotti, or Marlon Brando in The Godfather. These are the bosses. These are the ones in charge. These are the ones who make the most money. They're the ones who do a lot of the things, a lot of the illegal things. They didn't personally do, but a lot of times they directed them. And that is how that would go. The next person in the family is the underboss. The underboss would be like the vice president. He would be, in this case, it would be Sammy the Bull Gravano, who was John Gotti's underboss. And he ended up ratting on Gotti, sent Gotti to prison. Sammy admitted to 19 murders, and he implicated Gotti in 4 of them. So that's how these things work. If you don't take care of your people, sometimes they will turn around and make things miserable for you. Next thing we've got is the consigliere. This is the person who is the advisor to the family. They mediate disputes. They're often the boss's right-hand man. They answer questions. Sometimes they're the ones who are the go-between between the boss and anybody else. And the Godfather, it was Tom Hagen, portrayed by Robert Duvall. So the next person in this list of the family tree, you got the boss, the consigliere, the underboss, and then you got the capos, the caporegime. They are the leaders of captains of the groups of guys who would go out and do the work. The mafia is just an organization that it's an illegal organization that does illegal things to get money, and that's the bottom line. To make money and funnel it up until the boss is at the top making the most money. And not different than any other company. People on the bottom do the hard work, get the most time in jail. People above them maybe keeps going up. So what happens is the capos, they generally run crews, at least they used to years ago. They'd run crews of like 10 guys, and those people were soldiers. Usually all of these people were considered made men, and the capos then would report to the underboss. Oops, forgot. Not a touch screen computer. So the people then underneath are the soldiers. Now these are the guys that do most of the dirty work. They report to the captain. They usually aren't allowed to work with other captains unless they get permission. They're usually stuck with working with one person, and that is who they work with. Generally, everyone we've talked about to this point are considered made men, meaning they were inducted into the mafia. There used to be a ceremony where they would pledge their loyalty to the mob family above all. If you've seen The Godfather or some other things, a lot of times they'd have a ceremony. All the people would be sitting around a table. They would burn a little card with a saint on it, and pledge their oath, and then they would do anything. Your baby's dying in the middle of the night, and your captain calls, that comes first. And unfortunately, that is how that life is. And lastly, the last people in this group are the associates. The associates are not made men. They're people on the outside that work for the soldiers. So there's constantly all kinds of crime going on in all different places, all different things. And these are the people who work with the soldiers to bring in money. And really, that's the bottom. They are friendly with members of the family. Generally, again, they usually work with one soldier, but since they're not made men, they don't necessarily have to report to any one specific person. But the thing that all of these people have in common, I've kind of mentioned it, is that they all make money. They send a portion up to the person above them. So associates do a bank robbery, for example, and let's say they get away with it, and they get 50,000. Maybe 45,000 has to go up to the person above them, and he sends 40,000 up to the person above him, who then sends 35,000 up to the next guy, who sends another 30,000 up. So the boss at the top, who did nothing, gets most of the money. The associate might make $5,000 out of that. I'm just picking numbers out of the air, but that's kind of how it works, and it just keeps going up like that. People on the bottom who have the most exposure to the law, they're the ones who also are the least compensated for all of this. The belief that many of these men are rich is a big myth. If you've seen some movies like Goodfellas or Donnie Brasco, you've seen how the guys at the bottom survive. They break into parking meters or they do small crimes just to make enough money to survive. The big myth about them, a lot of them used to, and it still is that kind of thing. They're driving the fancy car, and other people want to be them, but maybe the fancy car is all they have. They're not doing anything else, not making big dollars. So it is I don't know. A lot of them are born into it. They have family members that are in it, and that's why they do it. Other ones, they just want that power, and I think that that's how they think that they're going to get it. It's not something that uh, most people aspire to do. I guess that's how I could say that. So, the first leaders of the Buffalo Mafia, we've got a lot of them coming from this coastal city in Italy called Castellamare del Golfo, Castle by the Sea, and beautiful seaport that for some reason in Sicily, a lot of these people came from. Angelo Palmieri, and Steve Magaddino all came from there. I actually went to Italy on my honeymoon, and we went to Sicily, and we took a bus over here to Castellamare, and it was in January, so it was an off season. Nothing was going on really, but it was kind of weird. We'd be walking down the street, and you'd see somebody open their shutters and watch us, walk down around the corner and close their shutters, and very, very, they don't expect outsiders, and I guess we were lucky that wasn't, nothing happened to us. So it's just an interesting thing. So in Buffalo, like I said, Dante Place was the place where the early Italians settled when they came to Buffalo. They were the immigrants at the bottom. After the Irish had been the immigrants that came here and they built the Erie Canal, then other immigrants were coming in, and there was an influx in the late 1800s, early 1900s. A lot of Italians came, and this here shows Dante Place. This shows where the whole area was, right around here, right down in that whole area where the arena, where the odd used to be, and where that whole new Erie Canal area is. They have an ice skating rink and such. This is where Angelo Puma had his power when he first came to America and was settled in this area. He was supposedly involved in a multitude of different crimes. A lot of times, um, back then especially, crimes included things like blackmail. And blackmail is a form of extortion in which the threat is to expose an embarrassing or damaging information to either your family or your business, trying to ruin your life. So I've seen these kind of blackmail notes, but a lot of that took place, especially back then. Once in a while you see it. It's not as big of a deal now. Um, I mean, with the internet, everybody's life is out on there as it is. Another thing you've got, what we got here? Extortion. Extortion is obtaining money or property by a threat to a victim's property or loved ones, intimidation or a false claim of a right. You're going to extort money from someone. You're going to say that, excuse me, you have a small grocery store, and you're going to start paying us $1,000 a week to protect you, even though you didn't need any protection before this. But you're going to give us $1,000 a week to protect you from the bad guys. They are the bad guys, but they're going to extort that from you, and you don't have a lot of choice. I mean, you can go to the law. Now, back in these days, especially, police officers were not paid well, so it was easier for criminals to pay police officers, sometimes more than they would make in a year, to look the other way or to give them inside information. And it was just a whole system that continued to go on and on and on. Another thing we've got, is, especially still even today, gambling. Now with the lottery and casinos out here, we have a ton of Native American casinos in Buffalo. I know you've got the Seneca casinos, and this was something that was huge. There would be the Italian lottery, which is one of the ones, the Italian, the Irish, there was a bunch of different lotteries that were run by the people that eventually became, they took those ideas and became legitimate lotteries like you see now. And what they would do was they had the Italian lotteries, they had illegal casinos, something like this. They would have these in basements, in garages. Um, they would have high stakes card games, poker games, blackjack, things like that. And these were where they made a ton of money. Because a lot of times regular people off the street would come in here and they'd spend their money. Or it was a weird system where a lot of the criminals, the gangsters, the mobsters, the mafia would make their money and they'd go back to these places and they'd spend all their money drinking and betting and gambling and playing card games and roulette and all these different things. And it was just this vicious circle where again they'd be feeding on themselves. So first boss is thought to be Joe DiCarlo, Joe DiCarlo Sr. He let's go back one second. Thought to be the first so-called mafia boss. Angelo Palmieri is thought to be by some to be his top lieutenant, or probably like an underboss or a consigliere. DiCarlo moved to Buffalo about 1908 from Brooklyn. And what happens is things like this. These bombings were taking place. With Palmieri working with him, they extorted money from grocers, food vendors, pushcart vendors, and there was a thing called the Black Hand. They used to send big extortion things. They'd have a picture of a black hand, like an ink hand on a piece of paper. They'd leave it at somebody's house, and if they didn't pay, then a lot of times this is what happened. They would bomb their house or their business. So about 1919, Angelo Palmieri moved to Niagara Falls, leaving DiCarlo to run Buffalo. But Joe DiCarlo Sr. died in 1922, just a couple years later. His son, Joe Jr., who you see here, very much expected to take over the Buffalo Rackets, but something stood in his way. Stefano Magadino, known as the Undertaker, not by anybody close to him because they would not have survived. But he was born in Castellamare del Golfo. He was living in Brooklyn in 1922, and what happens was Angelo Palmieri knew that DiCarlo Sr. died. He gives Magaddino a call and he says, "Hey, do you want to come to Buffalo and run things?" And Magaddino was pretty interested. Magaddino himself was a bad guy. This is a picture of him on the far left with the bandage across his face. He was arrested in 1921 and accused of being part of the Good Killers, a nationwide murder ring. He was released after 30 days because they didn't have any evidence against him or enough evidence. And that was when he gets this call and decides that it's time to move on and decides to go to Buffalo. He moved there. He was in Buffalo for a short time, and then he moved to Niagara Falls over on Whitney Avenue. There was a large Italian population, and a lot of them were from Sicily, so it was an easy area for him to control people. During Prohibition, which started in 1920, Magaddino made millions of dollars selling illegal liquor. The border to Canada was right there. Canada didn't have, at first, they didn't have Prohibition. And when they did, they were still allowed to manufacture alcohol. They just couldn't keep it. So they would ship it to America. And Magaddino claimed that he and his cousin mobster Joe Bonanno from New York City had 40 trucks on the road and he was making $10,000 a day in illegal gambling. This was all in the 1920s. $10,000 a day would be huge today. Imagine that in 1920s money. So he took over a funeral parlor in Niagara Falls, and that became his legitimate uh, business. And because he had so much money, he had a lot of police on the take there. So now again, there's a lot of different crimes that the mafia has committed over the years. There's gambling, murder, union takeover, loan sharking. Today, there's things like debt collection and stock swindles where they would they'd buy a stock at real cheap, we're talking like pennies. They'd call all these people and get it going up until, it's up to maybe $1 and get all these people buying this stock, and then they sell all their shares at $1 when they had bought them all at, 2 cents a piece. And those are the kind of things that they do today, among other things. So let's jump to 1957. Apalachin. This is in Apalachin, New York. And this was an interesting and very important part of the American Mafia history. On November 14th, 1957, about 100 men met at the home of Joseph Barbera, who was a soft drink bottler. He was known as the Barber, and he was one of Magaddino's contacts and believed to be probably like a captain in that area. So there was a meeting that was organized by Magaddino at Barbera's home at the behest of Vito Genovese, another mob boss out of New York City. State Trooper Edgar Croswell happened across the expensive cars that were pulling into this area and was curious what was going on. So he called for backup, and what happened was one of the guests saw the police, and many of the guests took off. They were running through the woods. Some of them got in their cars and just drove away like nothing was going to happen. And Magaddino was not caught. It's believed that him and a bunch of others ran through the woods and were able to escape the police, who all they did was they put up roadblocks and they were just checking IDs of people. They really didn't have any idea what was going on. They just knew that all these expensive cars should not have been in this area at this time, November, mid-November of 1957. John Montana was a former councilman in Buffalo. He owned the Montana or the Madison Cab Company, which had exclusive rights at the Central Terminal down there on the east side. And James LaDuca was one of Magaddino's son-in-laws. Both of them were caught and brought in for questioning. Everybody that was caught, they all said that they were there to visit Barbera, who they all claimed was sick. So they just all happened to congregate there at the same time just to visit a sick friend. Nobody believed it. And here's John Montana on the right, the tall man. He had been named Citizen of the Year like just the year before. And this was not a good thing. This made national headlines. So what happens is he stepped away from the mafia after this time. This up to this time, J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI, very powerful man. Nobody is 100% certain, but most people believe that he knew that there was some type of organized crime syndicate across the country, but he wasn't interested in it. Didn't put any FBI agents on it, anything. After this happened, he didn't have a big choice, and what he did was he created the Top Hoodlum program. And this is a chart, one of the first charts that they created of the Buffalo area. At the very top is Magaddino. On his left is Montana. Fred Rendascio is his underboss at this time. And then you've got a bunch of people underneath, all going down, section leaders. This is how they figured this out. Just they kind of figured it over time. They got informants, and they did this throughout the country. A lot of these people, well, most of them would claim that they had no tie to the mafia. There's no such thing as the mafia. Some of them had legitimate businesses. Roy Carlisi had clam stands that pretty much he controlled all the clams coming into Buffalo. I've had people contact me related to some of these people. So it's always been interesting to see how all this plays out. In order to stay in power, Magaddino often used murder as a tactic to keep people from disobeying him. It's an unfortunate thing. In 1936, he was still living here in Whitney Avenue. A bomb ripped through his home, which was right next door to his sister's, or the bomb ripped through this home, which was right next door to his. This was his sister's home, Archangela. Her husband, Nick Longo, was thought to be the target, but he wasn't home. But she was killed, and her three daughters, Magaddino's nieces, were all injured by this explosion. Not long after this, Magaddino would then, well, this is 36. It's a little bit later in the 1950s, about 20 years later. He built 4 homes up in Lewiston. They were brand new homes on Dana Drive. 4 in a row, excuse me, one for each of his daughters and their husbands, and one for himself. So what happened is, June of 1936, it was believed that Buffalo gangsters had been pressuring bookmaker Frank Lotempio of Batavia to pay Magaddino a cut of his profits. Just a few weeks later in June, Lotempio was gunned down here as he was crossing the street in front of Holy Cross Church in Buffalo. He was attending a wedding. Rumor had it that he had placed the bomb and Magaddino had him murdered in turn. Not the first murder Magaddino ordered. There were a ton of murders during Prohibition as there was fights over things. Plenty of murders directly attributed to members of the Magaddino crime family over the years, whether they were directly or they were associates. Murders during Prohibition as rivals fought over territory, murders over drugs and money and power. There was a series of murders in the 1950s, which led to the Aquino brothers. The Aquino brothers here, Fred and Frank, ran a lucrative bookmaking operation in local factories. Can think of some big factories like Bethlehem Steel, thousands of employees. And they were also involved in a burglary ring. Most of the people in this set of photos were related to that burglary ring. It's believed that Magaddino sent his underboss, Fred Rendascio, to pay the brothers a visit and say, hey guys, you know what? Understand you got a nice business going here, but it's time that you guys start sending a cut of that lucrative business to us because, you know, we're in charge of all of Western New York. And actually, Western New York all the way out to, you know, Apalachin area, other than New York City, Magaddino was in charge. Erie, Pennsylvania, Hamilton, Ontario. This was a big, big area that Magaddino had. That's why I said I'm still surprised that there isn't more talk about Magaddino as a mob boss because he had a lot of power. So, Quino brothers are like, you know what? We're doing okay on our own. We don't really need any assistance from you. So, thanks, but no thanks. We're not going to be sending you any money. So, because they refused to pay in September 1958, they both disappeared. Frank was found in his mother's car, beaten and shot. And Fred was found in a field. He had been tortured and acid had been poured over his head. Obviously, this was a warning to other people that, you know, if we come calling, it's not really a request. It's like, you give us the money, you do what we say, or we'll take care of you. Not in a good way. Which, again, if they were paying money, you would assume that they would be taken care of, which is not always the case. Some of you may remember the Peter Piccolo School of Hair Design. It was a big deal. Peter Piccolo had multiple locations. He was a very popular hairstylist in Buffalo. In 1975, Mr. Piccolo and his partner opened the School of Hair Design. They opened another salon in 1979 in Allentown. Now, on April 19th, 1979, his employees opened the salon on the second floor while Piccolo's body lay on the first floor. He had been shot. 4 bullets were in his body. Police called an execution, and they believe it was because of a botched cocaine deal. And the mafia has always said, Magaddino said it, all the mob bosses always came out and said, drugs, bad. We don't do drugs. Drugs bring bad things to us. You know, there's a lot of things that was the one thing that the federal government used to go after you. They would go after them for drugs. This goes back to the 20s, 30s, 40s. They didn't go after them for these crimes that they committed later on or today, but they would do that. They would go after them for those kind of things back then. So they always claimed that they didn't want anything to do with drugs, but you know that if there was big dollars, heroin deals, things like that going through, these guys were taking a cut. They were not just letting that slide through their hand. So here's a story about a cat burglar named Charles Chucky Carlo. He was convicted of possessing burglary tools in 1976. They offered him probation in return for him becoming informant. Not the best thing if you're a career criminal. Last thing you want to do is become an FBI informant. But if you don't want to go to jail for a long time, that's a lot of times the way they get you. So he reluctantly agreed and became the operator of this place. Here on the right side of this photo, there was a storefront on Elmwood Avenue. It's just 4 or 5 doors from Allen Street, and it was called the House of Tasha. What the House of Tasha was, it was an antique store. Looks like every other antique store in the area. The difference was the FBI ran this, and they had microphones and hidden cameras everywhere. And what Chucky's job was to bring in all of the stolen goods that were floating through the area. And he would become a fence, somebody that would bring in take in the stolen goods. He'd pay the thief for them, and then his goal as a fence would be then to resell them. So his contacts in the crime world worked, and he slowly started getting multiple people to come in, and all of this stuff was being recorded, and wasn't good for Chucky. So in 1971, 3 small paintings done by famous artist Rembrandt were stolen from a small French museum by Robert Lebec, a French art student. He was no mastermind. He realized that they were doing repairs at the museum, grabs the frames. He realized that these small, look 10 by 11 paintings were not mounted to the wall. So after several days or weeks, he came up with a plan. He wore some baggy clothes, wore a disguise-ish thing, and he cut the paintings out. No security there. Put them in his jacket and left. And they didn't find them right away. So simple robbery. Lebec ends up meeting up with a childhood friend, Jacques Fedit, in Amsterdam, and together they attempted to sell the paintings. This led to a German who was arrested, and because of that, this German flipped on them and said these 2 guys were involved in this. 2 of the paintings end up getting recovered. This is a picture of Rembrandt himself. Now, police were unsure who was the actual mastermind behind this. This was the only painting left. This was a study for a larger painting called The Rabbi. And because these 3 were arrested, they weren't sure who was in charge. Everybody's blaming each other. They let Lebec go. Fedit eventually got the rabbi, and he was a drug dealer. He travels to Canada, and he buried it an hour from Vancouver. It was buried in the dirt, supposedly in a safe, waterproof container. And it was here while he was up in the Vancouver area that he met Johnny Rio Gandolfo, who was hiding in Canada to avoid charges in the U.S. Gandolfo wanted a piece of Fedit's drug operation, though, and the 2 tangled several times. but he didn't give up his drug operation. But over time, people are hanging out, they're drinking, they're doing whatever they're doing. Word got out that he had this painting. He never told them where, but Gandolfo found out about the stolen Rembrandt, and when Fidit had left Canada to go make a deal overseas, he was able to convince some people who did know where it was that he wanted it, and he was able to get a hold of it. So the story gets better, and it comes full circle to Buffalo, where Jerry Fasolino was a frequent customer at Chucky's and at the undercover fence operation. Fasolino was a career criminal with arrests dating back at least to the 50s, involved in bookmaking, stolen goods. He's a burglar, involved in all kinds of different things over the years. Now, he told Chucky, he's like, hey, I can get my hands on this stolen Rembrandt painting. Would you be interested in it? Chucky's like, sure, if you can get a hold of that, then I'd be interested. So the tie on how Fasolino could get a hold of that was because he apparently was dating Johnny Rio's daughter. I don't know if this is Johnny Rio's daughter. This is probably not. It was probably he was dating his daughter on the side, one of those kind of things. So it takes some time to put all these things together. And 3 months later, a meeting was held with Chucky, Johnny Rio, Fasolino, and this guy, Thomas McShane, who was an undercover FBI agent and an art expert. So McShane comes in, he's the expert for Chucky. They get this painting, he brings it to the shop, Fasolino. McShane says, all right, I have to look at this painting. I got to determine if this is a real Rembrandt or not before I agree that I'm going to buy this, So he went through this whole thing, met Chucky at the house of Tasha, and after a painful examination, he declared with 95% certainty that it was the real deal, that it was really a Rembrandt. And this was a big deal because this fence operation didn't expect to do that. They just expected to bring in, stolen furs and jewelry and, candelabras and things like that. So when McShane met with Rio, with Johnny Rio then, he was expecting $250,000. Rio wanted a ton of money. He knows, this is Rembrandt, I'm getting a big payout. McShane, though, said, look, this painting is a study for a larger painting. He wasn't sure of that at the time, but he convinced them that it was a study for a larger painting. It looked like there had been damage. There might have been water damage. Somebody might have tried to clean it with some, with some cleaners and stuff. So he's like, look, this painting's worth $22,000 at the most. So Fasolino agreed to $22,000. They had no choice. They really didn't. So they took the $22,000, not $250,000, walked away. Because this was part of a larger sting operation, this whole house of Tasha, Rio was let go, Johnny Rio. FBI followed him, but after 2 days, they lost him. And 3 months later, they finally shut down this house of Tasha, and all of the things started rolling. All of the everything that was going on. So what happens? Many arrests related to what the FBI would call Operation TP, including an assistant DA, a county legislator, an attorney, and a bunch of mob characters. Chucky went into witness protection for obvious reasons. After a long delay, because this painting was part of a whole sting operation, it couldn't go back to France. It was, evidence. Eventually, it was sent back to France, back to that same museum, and the security had been increased by then to make sure that that didn't take place again. Here's a quick story about two people, Faust Novino and John Sacco. This is John Sacco here. So in 1976, Novino, he's just he's a criminal, tough guy, young guy. And what happens is, if I remember the story correctly, I don't remember every story right 100%, but I'm pretty sure that they thought he was involved or he was involved with a shooting with somebody's family member. So this one guy tells him, he goes, hey, meet me over on Connecticut Street we're going to go and pick up some tools for a burglary operation. So they go over to this place. It was a former, I forgot what it was, and we do pass it, or we did pass it when we did the West Side tour. And what happens is, so they go in. The guy that's with him goes in first, and it's pitch black in there. They're in just a couple steps. Novino is not happy with the situation, and he pulls out his gun, and everybody starts shooting, and there's shooting going on all over. Everybody, because there was like a handful of guys in there that were ambushing him. Novino takes off, runs down the street, and gets away. One of the people comes stumbling out, falls out on the front sidewalk there. Is John Sacco. He's a career criminal, a burglar, all kinds of things. He is a mob member of the Magaddino family. He's bleeding. Police are called because there was so many shots fired. And Sacco sitting there when the police come, and they're like, "Hey, who shot you?" And Sacco looks up and he's like, "Nobody shot me." He's got blood pouring out of him, and that's a famous folklore story of the Buffalo Mafia. But it is, just one of those things on how it goes. Unions, mentioned earlier that unions were a big deal in Buffalo and in the Mafia in general. So Local 210, I used to see that. That used to be where I'd start the tour for the Allentown mob tour. And Local 210 was a big laborers local, and it'd been run by the mob for decades. Now in this picture here, you've got on the left is Jimmy Griffin, on the right is Ed Koch, the mayor of New York City, and right in the middle, that is Ron Fino. Ron Fino was son of Joe Fino, who was a mob member. For a very brief time in the early 70s, Joe Fino was mob boss. Really quick, Stefano Magadino is arrested along with a bunch of other people, his sons, and they find all this money in 1970, I forget, it's late 60s, early 70s. And Magaddino basically kind of loses his luster and his power. And this is when other people start to vie for power. He had already been mob boss for 40 some years, untouched, never arrested. And so there's this vie for power. For a short time, Joe Fino is boss, but it was a ploy as these different factions of the Buffalo Mafia were fighting to take over. So Ron Fino goes to work for Local 210, realizes he's not a member of the mob, but he realizes that they don't treat people well. Surprise, surprise. And, if you're a mob member, if you're related to the mob, you get the best jobs, the easiest jobs, the ones that pay the most. The people further down, the Polish and the Irish and the black people, none of them would get good jobs if they got any jobs. And Ron decided that he was going to fight for them. So he runs for business manager of the union against the mob, against his father's warnings, and he wins. Decides that he's going to try and turn things around. The mob calls him in for a meeting, and they're like, "You know what? Great, you won that position. We'll tell you exactly what to do, how to do it, and when to do it." Ron wasn't happy with that, and one day finds out later that it wasn't a happenstance, whatever that word is. He didn't meet him by accident. A mob, an FBI agent, who convinces Ron to become an informant. He's not. He basically works for them, and he provides all kinds of information on the union and mob activity from here, from other cities. People are arrested over the years. Ron goes into hiding for a while, never goes into witness protection. But one of the people that fought against the mob and survived. But Faust Novino, he also fought against them. They never went after him either. It was very weird how sometimes they wouldn't, sometimes they wouldn't. So here's another story. The Aguechis. Albert Aguechi was a heroin smuggler, and he was a Sicilian. He was living in Canada. he was paying tribute, paying a cut of all the money that he made to Steve Magaddino, running out of the Hamilton area. So this man here, Johnny Papalia, he ran Hamilton, Ontario. He was Magaddino's man there, part of the Magaddino crime family. He contacts Aguechi to run some drugs, and together they work on this drug ring. It's a big heroin drug ring spanning multiple countries: Sicily, France, New York City, Montreal. And by 1958, there's 32 or so people that are in this drug ring, including an informant, which of course nobody knew about. So Joe Valachi, you may have heard of this guy. He was a career criminal. He was in prison on a heroin ring charge himself in the late 1950s. He was released on appeal, and an associate ratted on him. So he left the country and ends up going to Canada. That's where he meets Albert Aguechi, and he decides to work on this drug ring with them. So what happens is people make mistakes. This is a big thing. A lot of people involved. People make mistakes. There's an informant involved, and the drug ring was broke. You may have remembered this. There was a whole thing called the French Connection, and this was all part of that. Again, early 70s or late 50s, late 50s. So what happens is Aguechi is arrested in New York City. Johnny Pops Papilli is arrested. Two men flip. Aguechi, he's been paying Magaddino money for this. He's expecting Magaddino to pay him for as an attorney. It didn't happen because it's drug related. Magaddino washed his hands of it, stood back and said, "What are you going to do?" So Aguechi's wife ends up selling her house so they can get bail money. He immediately jumps bail and travels to meet Magaddino, supposedly in Niagara Falls, where he is never seen again. They find him dead near Rochester, 40 pounds of flesh cut from his body, tied, burned, and it's believed to be done by Magaddino's underboss, Fred Rendaccio. Back to Joe Valachi. Now Valachi's in jail. Vito Genovese is in jail. Meets Genovese one day. Genovese gives him a kiss. The Italians, kiss of cheeks. Valachi is a paranoid man. He thinks that it's a kiss of death. He ends up killing another inmate. He beats him to death, who he thinks is coming to kill him. And now he's in even deeper. So what does he do? He flips. He becomes a giant rat to the mob, goes and testifies before Congress, all kinds of things. It was on TV. It was a huge deal. And he ends up being held in a Texas military prison where he supposedly had met this woman from Niagara Falls some years ago. They had met one time when he had visited the area, and they stayed in contact. And this woman was his girlfriend. In 1971, he died. None of his family claimed his body, so this woman claimed his body. She had it buried in Lewiston, New York, up there right under Magaddino's nose. Apparently was buried in a secret grave, and when she died some years later, she was buried next to him. There's markers on both their graves now, so interesting story there. And one of the last ones we'll talk about today was Joe Todaro. Joe Todaro was a crew member back in the 1960s. He was just one of Magaddino's guys. This is when he started his first pizzeria over in Tonawanda. He rose through the ranks, and in the 1990s, he took over as head of the Buffalo family. Now, Todaro is the one seated. On the left is his son, Joe Jr., and this photo is from the late 50s, early 60s at their pizza joint. When Todaro died, and actually before he died, his son supposedly took over. There's always talk. Everybody claims neither of them have ever been arrested. They've been accused of a lot of things, but never anything. So it's really hard. In the 1990s, it was thought that the Buffalo Mafia had died, but it is still alive and kicking. A lot of different businesses they're involved in, and there are many more stories in Gangsters and Organized Crime in Buffalo. There's another set of books that, if you really want to get into the deep dive, called DeCarlo. It was a two-book set, big, thick books by Mike Tona, and they go through details of everything. Now, in this book, there's a ton of stories. Some of them are there's a ton of some of them aren't real detailed because you can only fit so much in the book when your publisher wants you to keep the page number down. But I put as many in as I could, and there's also addresses. If you can go online, you can go for a drive, you can go check out places from everywhere from Niagara Falls to the east side of Buffalo. And that is a lot of that. Beginning, it was mentioned that I have a new book coming out. Anybody remember 1984 in Buffalo? Billy Lawless had a brand new sculpture erected where the Catholic building is downtown now, where their new headquarters is. And it's the Elm Oak Corridor. And it was called Green Lightning. It was a big deal. This book, 15 Minutes Bamboozled in Buffalo, is about Billy Lawless, Green Lightning, Jimmy Griffin, and everything that's happened to Billy over the years. He became a fighter for free speech and anti-censorship, and it's a pretty good book. So, of course, I wrote it, so I have to think so. But if there were any questions, I can try to answer them, and
Okay. Wow, that was awesome. Thank you so much. First question we received in the chat was, can you hear me okay, Michael?
I can hear perfect.
Okay, perfect. First question is, did you read the Hammer Conspiracies book about the mob in Rochester in the 1970s? I lived there and knew many of the people and situations that were in the book.
I did. I do have it. That was one of the 300 books that I didn't get rid of because it has a lot of ties to Buffalo. Yes, I did read that. Yes, and I don't know if I used it in reference to this. Actually believe I did use something for this book.
Okay, cool. Did Sacco die right there and then?
No, he did not die there. He lived. He was an on and off informant, and they never could believe anything he said. He would give them information, and because he got arrested eventually and went to jail for. He died in jail, I believe. But he would give them information, and then he would recant it, and so they never believed anything he said.
Okay. Next question was, what do you think of the nickname for the Bills fans as the Bills Mafia? Now I see bumper stickers like Mafia Boss, etc.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, and I don't know. I think the word mafia has become just kind of a generic name for a lot of things now. I don't know if true mob members are huge fans of those kind of things. It is interesting, and again, it's like that. And before I left Buffalo, I don't know if they still do. They were calling Buffalo the Below. There was, I don't know. It's okay. I mean, I'm not against it. Um, my son claims he's a member of the Bills Mafia, so what can I say?
We hear it a lot up here. There's a
Yeah.
lot. Next question. Why was Peter Piccolo killed? Do you think it was a mob hit?
Yeah, that was a question. I don't know if they have ever come to a conclusion on that. They never found anyone, so I would guess it's considered just a cold case at this point. But yeah, it's because it was um, they believe again maybe a drug deal gone bad. And was it because, there were rumors that he owed money, so there's a lot of different things. It could have been something completely unrelated, but, and the business did continue on. His partner continued the business on for a while after that.
Okay, a few more. One came through directly to me. Were you related to any of the Rizzos in the book?
So there's a few Rizzos, and I mentioned my dad. He had said that his cousin was in the mob. So I'm doing this research, and I come across this newspaper article. My dad was Nick Rizzo, and there's this Nick Rizzo that was arrested. I'm like, I know this isn't you because I know who you are, and you're not that person. But he's like, oh yeah, that was my cousin, and turned out that yeah, he was considered like I forgot the bag man or something like that they would call it. He used to carry money like when they had like casinos or things like that. He'd be the guy that a lot of times carried money, and he yeah he just kind of like a lot of them retired. They moved out west, and he kind of just disappeared like a lot of them did.
Okay, and the one question came through, do you think the Mafia is still thriving in Buffalo today?
I don't know if it's thriving, but I've read stuff that says it is definitely still around. If you follow the news lately, there's been a lot of things going down with some adult clubs that are related to the Todaros, nephews and things like that. There's people in debt companies, debt collection companies. There's a whole bunch of different things going on. But yeah, I believe that it never completely died and it kind of like went underground like it was originally. But yeah, I believe that it's still there.
Okay. Let's see, one more just came through the chat. My great uncle-in-law was Joe Barbara. Do you have any additional information about him?
There was two. There was senior and junior, and junior had been helping his father during that whole Apalachin episode. Uh, part of the reason that it was uncovered was because they went and ordered like hundreds of pounds of steak and stuff like that. Who orders hundreds of pounds of steak at a local butcher? So things like that rose to suspicion of the local police. But there is some stuff on here, and there are several books about Appalachian. I can't recommend all of them. One of them I wasn't a big fan of. I don't remember which one, but there was one that was pretty good. And again, if you haven't and you want, Fulton History has a great website that you can search um, newspaper articles, and they're primarily from New York State, and I think the state might have a website too that you can search New York newspaper articles, and obviously newspapers.com, but that's a pay one. But those are good places to search for people by name, and that's a lot of times that's what I do. You search by name, and sometimes that leads you down the rabbit hole of finding other people's names and things like that. But I don't have anything else specific about them. But yeah, there's stuff in my book, and there are some other books about Appalachian, which probably go into them a little bit more deep.
Okay, last question we'll
Sure,
take.
sure.
Here is what is wrong with calling Buffalo the Below? How does that connect to the Mafia?
That doesn't affect. It was just one of those things. I guess maybe I'm old, but I didn't. Buffalo is Buffalo to me, and when I was I don't know. I wasn't a fan of people, but then younger people have different ideas, and I think that's what it is. Younger people want to call it the Bills Mafia, and they want to call it the Bealo and everything, and I'm okay with that now. So at the time, 10 or so years ago, 10, 15 years ago, I wasn't a huge fan of that, but it's all good.
Last question came
Sure.
through. The art thrift shop looks like it was right next to the Piccolo building. That seems strange. Any thoughts?
Uh, what shop?
It says the art thrift shop. Looks like
It,
it was
yeah.
right next to the Piccolo building.
Yeah,
That seems
it
strange.
could be that was just a big commercial downstairs. There were multiple storefronts, and they just chose that one because they were able to set up all their equipment in there. And like a couple blocks away, they rented another apartment where they had FBI agents sitting in there watching the cameras and listening to the microphones. It was this whole elaborate thing, and I think it was just a good location of convenience.
Okay, okay. Well, geez, thank you so much, Michael, for spending all this time with us. It was such an interesting discussion. Thank you, everyone online, for being here with us today. I hope you'll come back and maybe do one of your other books for us. I know you have one on the Polish Mafia in Buffalo. Is that correct?
I do. They call me corny. Yes, that was very
Yeah.
popular. But yeah, but thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you everybody for coming and spending an hour with me. I'm really happy to have done this.
Yeah, awesome. And if you want to send me where people can get your new book, we'd be happy to send that out to everybody. And this class will be recorded if you'd like to watch it again, everyone. So thank you again, Michael. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will talk to you real soon.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.